Definitely the pieces of time. There are a lot of trends in resumes where things that you may have heard of in the past we don't use anymore, so we'll talk about what is missing from them, as well as the reasons to create what I call a targeted resume that really gets your client into the mode of thinking of how do I, as you can see there, there's a number of those that present some issues for people who are trying to write about themselves. Definitely the road testing of a resume is critical because you want to find out how it works, whether or not it will work, that type of thing. And then we'll talk about applicant tracking systems and how we can convert a resume to pass those appropriately. In those are the mundane details, and we have to really go ahead and be injecting a very strong marketing focus, or these people are not able to get someone else who's doing the same job. They don't. They don't. Resumes that we see these days need to have that very quick glance built into them. You've probably heard this. There's going to be just a few seconds that someone takes to look at. Is that resume trends change almost every 6 months, and I can definitely say that in the past 10 years we have seen a huge evolution in what goes on in a resume, what is effective, that type of thing. In fact, the global competition we hold in my industry even just a few years ago. The fact that everybody has access now to the internet, in terms of what makes a resume effective at this point is that you have to grab that reader right away. Immediately right there, if you end up with it on the second page, your interviewer is going to be sitting in front of you. A lot of the samples that I provided to you have what I call a highlights. We need to pull it forward onto the first page of the resume. Professional as the basic example. Putting the title, qualification of it. This takes goal, and we'll about this resume. If you actually a real estate broker. So there's a lot most of her experience. The branding paragraph this candidate brand see on some of that's one of the first and some of these what they if you've got a recent grad or somebody who's trying to change thing that the terms of how qualified is the keyword, which is a great job board to look through job listings for what they are targeting and then pull out the different keywords out of those particular in Career Builder that I've also referenced here that covers keywords in some detail. So definitely a critical piece of the resume. One other piece you'll notice on some of these samples is that we have some type of what I would call backup to what the person has said about themselves. You'll also see this on the return to work resume as well as the sales professional resume. The great thing about a testimonial is you don't have to quote the person by name necessarily. It's more of interest to the reader what title that person had, and it's a good way to get those glowing letters of reference or even those glowing congratulations emails or what have you into the resume that you want to pay attention to, because if you start to just talk about the work history immediately on most of these resumes, some people will not get the depth and the breadth of what this person's experience looks like. So that highlight section, especially on the sales resume, this is critical. This person had business-to-business sales experience from years ago, actually not that long ago, and this resume was written right around 2008, I believe. And this is a very successful tactic. I will tell you that I would headings. This is another thing you might notice, especially on the sales resume. You'll also see it on what I call the age discrimination resume. Certain words in the headings are repeated over and over. For sales, obviously the sales word itself. In the age discrimination example, this person has a technology background. We name his section Technology Career Highlights. You want to reinforce power verbs are something that are resume industry standard, and this is a great way to keep from saying provided, responsible. The professional resume industry is that these verbs absolutely cannot mimic each other. If you say that somebody has sold something, your next way you want to say it would be closed, generated. Color is another facet of resume. That's an old trick people used to use to stand out in a stack of paper. But just a touch of color, maybe on border, to the document, helping it stand out but not having it be over the top. So you do want to avoid colors like neon green or yellow or something like that, and stick with maybe a touch of navy, even a bit of red. Definitely some taupe works well once in a while.
Terrific. And we'll send that to you all with the
Of what really pops on a resume, it's always the metrics. If you're not necessarily sure how to pull some out, they don't really know what someone means by putting figures on a resume. In terms of budgets, that is showing up on a resume. If they're helping out with any particular projects that would improve the business performance, this can be anything from operational improvement to making sure that work is done more efficiently. If they're able to put a ballpark percentage to it, it can really pop on the resume. definitely for a salesperson, any type of sales resume absolutely has to have figures, or they're just totally going to be overshadowed by someone such as the example you're looking at here. Sales people definitely need to be tracking some ballparks at least of what they're doing and or the ROI to particular projects. The size of where a person works is of interest. If you have a nurse, you may want to specify if you have a client who can point to some cost savings that they've achieved for their employer, that is absolutely something to emphasize, especially who makes around someone's achievements or around their work, because if a company is growing or declining, it is a particular challenge that that person is succeeding, perhaps despite in spite of, and it can. It's not a direct report. Again, can be of interest to an employer. If there's a particular manage particular accounts, and if there's 10,000 calls a day coming into that call center, and they're one of a team that is handling that, that is pulling out metrics for one's own resume, and definitely speaking to, again, how the dollar call from today's resumes, meaning what we used to perhaps put on there, definitely the objective needs to go. An interesting thing that most people find is that include a photograph on a resume, you're inviting that HR person to throw it out. References, or even the phrase references available upon request, are pretty much passé at this point. It is a given that you've got them and you're going to be providing them. One thing you do want to look out for is that third person wording. This is where your verbs are plural. Bit more of what I would call that implied first person. If you were going to say, that You want to hone in on whatever those qualifications are. Sales rep, but they can also manage projects. It is a how to figure out whether or not they again, the site Indeed.com is great for this. So if needed, so if you're looking to see what people look and certainly what I encourage people to do who say, well, I can do X, Y, and Z, I say, well, you need to go find some job descriptions for these, and if they are consistent with each other, then great. They fit in one resume. If they don't, it's time to split things off. Someone might be pursuing, certainly if they're looking at federal jobs, they should be writing a federal resume. There are people who specialize in doing this because it's a very specific type of writing, and so you can hunt for a federal job. My understanding is that it can be kicked out pretty quickly. So definitely something to think about. I get asked here and there the difference between a CV and a resume. CV standing for curriculum vitae, and it's used most often in medical fields or in academic fields. It is also used widely in Europe. CV is usually longer. It is usually fairly dry. It's not going to have that marketing focus. From there, much different type of approach, and you have to look very carefully at these jobs to see, are they asking for a CV? One other difference you'll see for clients who are from Europe is that it's very common for them to use a photograph on a resume and to provide personal information on a CV. So that's something obviously we don't have as a convention in the U.S. and people do challenging situations. I have several resumes that address different different issues that are going to arise. Lack of a degree is very, very common. Even I would say a third of the executives I work with either did not start a degree program, didn't finish one, they don't have, so this can make them feel as if they are very, very much left out in the cold. One thing I would encourage you to do is reassure people that they're not alone in this. I have this discussion several times a week where I say, you know what, you're the umpteenth person I've talked to in this situation, and frankly, to, however, even if they only have just a semester of college, you want to show where they've attended. The sales resume has an example of this where she's still working on her degree and she's called a candidate for this bachelor's degree. You can also list some professional training, but if the person is fairly that's of interest, but that's very dependent on the part of the country that you're in. Much more common on the East Coast. Worked in a particular industry and they're trying to get out of it, either because everything's went downhill. If you think of the mortgage industry just a couple years back, this was pretty common. You want really don't have words on here like residential development, her back into that industry. We're trying to put her forth into that more business-to-business focus. So hopefully that makes sense. When it comes to changing the actual career, this is where a person can be paid work experience and not relegated way in the back of the resume. The career change you see here is for an executive who was very interested in working in nonprofit, and he had been very involved in various nonprofits and then was trying to combine that with his leadership experience. For him. For separating military a career target title, which is something you see on the career change resume, is very helpful. What happens there is if you have someone who clearly has not been in this job before, you want to make the employer aware that you are titling this resume for something this person is shooting for, not something they've been doing already. The words combat and weapons and whatnot, that I have made here that you can to work, and this is the classic, parent who's had the professional career prior to maybe taking time off to take care of take a look where this person had already had experience as an asset manager in the commercial real estate field. We pulled it forward into a professional and as you see her volunteer experience, you really cannot say very much about that. It's, you know, she's pulled into different projects that the most difficult situations on a gaps in work history is another is that the want to put something on here that makes the employer think, no way am I hiring this person. He was done with his treatment. He was healthy. It really is not something to be bringing up. You're not going to it accounts for the time period without necessarily spending a lot of time on it. Age bias, as I'm sure you have seen in the job market, is definitely alive and well. There's field that the person is in. Technology, as you're seeing here, is a very critical field in terms of employers wanting or thinking that they want younger candidates. The end of the age discrimination resume that is listed in here, you'll see that the person's early career experience is just listed as additional experience at the end of the resume. It does see that date. Honestly, if that degree is more than, I'd say, 15 to 20 years old, it's not going to be an advantage to list it. And it does get the person does help really hit the mark. This is a piece a lot of people skip because they're not sure what to do. They've tweaked their resume till for intended to use. It's not as easy or someone you did a great job. It's great feedback to use. Will catch things. I'm not referring to he's an expert at this, but they should be able to interpret and figure out what your message is. And one of the other strategies I really like to use is to get a hold of a recruiter back, because they are going to be very honest with that candidate and tell them, you know, that information. In terms of the applicant tracking systems, and this is something correctly, they're going to work swing in working. Going on going over optimizing the site and clients will need to know. Finding employer contacts on LinkedIn is one of the most more findable or be a bit more closed down, so we'll cover those. Promoting oneself on LinkedIn is critical. Didn't quite get to yesterday, but it is listed in the PowerPoint. Is there some resources that people can use to stay current on what's going on LinkedIn?
Great. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As far as the reasons to join LinkedIn, and I know that people who are not on it are very confused by this, definitely a business hub. As you're seeing here, there's more than 90 million registered users. They're actually closer to 100 million. The problem is people have orphan profiles out there, so no one can really get an accurate count. We have surveyed recruiters in the career and at this point, that they have released within the last so that you're more findable, your clients are more findable by the people that you want to have looking at your profile. LinkedIn does have a job search engine. That's not necessarily the only reason I recommend using it, but it's out there. It is fairly good quality. One other huge piece about using look for you online. When an employer gets a resume, the first thing they do, if they're serious about that candidate, and this is anything other than what a place for yourself or your clients, because they're going to go look it up and they're going to need to see something that is in alignment with what's presented on the resume.
So there's the consistent branding with that as well, I imagine, too.
Exactly. Exactly. They wait around a bit, they set up a profile, it walks them through putting in some information, and then they forget about it, and they don't realize that there are this many, nooks and crannies to the site. Other thing you need to know about these is that LinkedIn has an internal built into it. In In findability, all of those keywords should be in that headline. They should definitely be built throughout the job titles. There are different ways that you can be doing that, and we'll cover that here in a minute. The other place to be sprinkling some keywords are in that whole, it's called specialties. It's like a list of keywords. There's a work experience section that's very similar to a resume. There's also a brand new skills section that I recommend using as well. The summary is something that appears very quickly on LinkedIn. When you look at someone's profile, it's the first piece. It's very similar to the summary placement, let's put it this way, on a resume, but you do not want to be dumping a resume summary in. Specifically, if you get that tuned for who you are, what you offer, some great keyword content, that is going to be a piece I would focus on first. If you don't populate it, LinkedIn grabs your last job title and pops it in there for you. The thing to keep in mind is that may not reflect the person's goal, especially if what they have in their current job is something like student. We went over this a bit yesterday for Clay. That's not necessarily saying, well, this is what if possible. It is 120 characters long. You do need to be very succinct. Definitely want to focus on what you offer. A lot of people make the mistake of putting something in there about how they're laid off and whatnot. That is just not helpful for being found, and when you are found, it's not very impressive. So here's an example of somebody who's a project manager. As you can see here, there's particular keywords someone might search for. Because if I'm an employer looking to hire a project manager, I may be looking for someone with this particular certification, with this Six Sigma background. Definitely I'm going to look for someone in a particular industry, manufacturing, what have you. LinkedIn allows you to add an industry as an area of specialty. But it doesn't say what industry you're in. If you only pick manufacturing but you have pharmaceutical experience, you're kind of stuck. So you do want to use that headline to your advantage. This person, this other example, is a bit more branded in terms of saying that this, they're leading something that's very defect-free, something that is enterprise level. In terms of what becomes very minimal on a headline is when you put something in that it's a no-brainer, like experienced. A, nobody's going to search for that, and B, really doesn't tell anybody anything about you. You want to avoid something that's negative that says, I'm laid off and looking. Well, no. I'm pretty close to using all of that. You definitely want to make sure that you got as much information as search function, and LinkedIn has actually changed that, and they point in time because they are changing their site right now. And those of us for you, you're best off using all of it. Don't put it into an either-or situation.
Well, you mentioned yesterday that going in see what's going on and what is new.
It is. One other thing that you can find is that since Google actually picks up your profile as a key piece of information, connections, you're actually going to be rising to the top on searches about your name. This is
Just to touch back for a moment on the completion of the profile. There's a note there that
but again, LinkedIn has changed things quite a bit. So that is because they have initially they started there initially, and I was grandfathered so that's an example of how things have changed. People are doing themselves a disservice by just plopping something in there that's very basic. Area where it can be critical to get the summary to be a little bit more personal. Again, but can't put in borders. I would call um, call format do on LinkedIn. You could you could be present. It's the put going to be resume paragraph. He's going to find content out. That up a and this is writing for the web. Attention spans are much shorter. You want a resume where they very carefully constructed it to avoid some age bias. You're trying to use in your resume, it really should be congruent with what ends up in LinkedIn, because there's no point in saying, hey, I graduated in 19. It's your home screen. Everybody should be able to see this. One note you're seeing here is that Emily has what's called a import type prompt here. What happens when you first join LinkedIn is it wants to pop all of your email addresses in here so that it can figure out who you know, who's on LinkedIn, and can we go ahead and invite these people to be in your network. Yes, I do recommend doing that. It is very will not see this piece up here anymore. It will be gone and you'll just be down here. The network updates, the status updates I spoke about here are right here. You can attach a short update. You can even put a link in there. So if Emily wanted to say I'm attending a seminar on LinkedIn, she could put it in here and it would be accessible to everyone. Something LinkedIn does, it figures out who you already know and whether or not you actually have that person somehow connected to you through someone else's email. It's a little unnerving because sometimes you're wondering, how does LinkedIn know that I know these people? Click on this. As you see here, this is giving her some profile statistics that we talked about, saying that someone at this particular company looked at her profile. When you get a someone at company name, you go click on it, it gives upon what settings they have. If you see that someone's anonymous, you're stuck with it. If you do decide to have an upgraded profile, pay more for using LinkedIn, you will see, as this is grayed out here, a list of keywords of how most people are finding you. It doesn't tell you specifically manager or what have you. As far as the profile itself, which is something we talked about here in terms of updating, you can view how your profile looks to other people. Emily's got a great picture here of your garden. You do not want a picture of yourself in the distance. I've written some blog posts on this because I've seen some astoundingly bad pictures. Pictures with pets, with your family. This is not the place for that. It's not Facebook. You definitely want to have something that is very, again, it's expressing the personality. It's where someone can recognize you, and it helps them get to know you or feel as if they know you. You will see when you are logged in as yourself, there's a view profile. You can also edit the profile. We talked a bit about headlines. Recommend something a little bit more meaningful for this, but it also pulled up, as you see here, her current job, which is something I said LinkedIn will do if you let it. You do want to get in here and change this. The same area where you change your name is where you would change your headline. You can also change your industry. If you look at education management, you could see that she could say she's in human resources, she's in technology. There's just no end to what you can pick here. She changes this a bit because I know she works on a lot of web technology. What we could do here, and these again may be pieces that people search for in her field. And even if she put that she's, in the careers industry or a career specialist, a specialist is kind of a tough one. It's not really a phrase most people are going to look for. We could put career search support or something like that. So getting this in here, you can see where adding, this is just a basic, symbol in here, makes it a little bit easier to read. Recommendations in the short run on her summary, she does have some good and engaging copy in here. She puts that I have the flexibility and positivity of a smiling contortionist. That's memorable. There's nothing wrong with that. But she could definitely take the summary and make it a lot wider. She can take these specialties. You've got about 500 characters to use in here. She's got some good technologies. She could make that a lot wider. I would recommend getting the hyphens out from away from the terms because people don't search for these terms together. They're not going to look for CS5/Microsoft, but they might look for that without the slash. So you do want to be careful how you've got that set up. She does have good white space. So she's done some great things here. She'll certainly want to be joining some groups. You get down here to these contact settings. This is where it looks very basic. You check off some boxes, and usually it assumes that you've been logged in for a while, so it'll make you give it a how you want to be contacted as well. So let's look at her settings here quickly. You'll see here it says her profile's 85% complete. She doesn't have connections yet. That settings are where you hover your mouse near your name at the top. You get a settings page. It is going to ask you, do you want to turn on or off these activity broadcasts? Is it okay that when we get in here and change her headline, everybody she knows, if she had the way we have it set right now. If you set it to anything else but that on a free profile, you're going to get this, well, you're not going to be able to see your own profile statistics. I will tell you when you upgrade, that is not necessarily the case. I have an anonymous profile because I look at a lot of profiles, and definitely the people I look at would probably be appalled to find out I was assessing their profile, but I still can see all of my profile statistics. So let me see here. I'm thinking we probably need to open it up for questions. Some groups she could join. Actually, let's do this. Let's very quickly show the group search. We could look for something like web content and see, you know, she could be joining intelligent social media, you know, all of these. As you see, she's going to be able to connect with 16 to 13,000 other people when she does that. When you do a people search, this is where the advanced people search is very helpful. And you're gonna come up with a ton of people in this kind of position. But definitely, if you're trying to at least get a good idea who might be a good contact for your client to get a hold of, this is a good way to do it.